joined. Welcome to folks that joined the Department of Energy, Oregon Energy Strategy listening session. We'll give another minute or two for folks to make their way in, and then we'll kick off our time together. So again, folks in the audience, we'll get started in just a minute, but welcome. All right, I'm not seeing other folks come in, so why don't we kick off? So welcome to Oregon Department of Oregon Energy Strategy listening session. Before I walk through and introduce how we're going to move through today, I want to pass it to Alan Zelenka.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us this morning. For those of you who I have not met, my name is Alan Zelenka. I'm the Assistant Director for Planning and Innovation at the Oregon Department of Energy. I lead the group of great people working on this, putting together the Oregon State Energy Strategy, including our excellent consultants, SETI and Kearns and West, and our amazing project manager, Edith Baer. Next slide, please. So hopefully all of you are somewhat familiar with ODO, but just in case, this is a slide that shows our mission and what we do. And as it says, ODO helps Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain resilient and affordable energy system. We advance solutions to shape an equitable clean energy transition, protect the environment and public health, and responsibly balance energy needs and impacts for current and future generations. I read that because that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish with the energy strategy. So I'm really excited about this morning and kicking off this listening session for this energy strategy. And as you may know, HB 3630 directed ODO to develop the state energy strategy, and we have to have it done by next fall, November 1st, 2025. So it's a long-term process. Hopefully you'll stick with us. And the energy strategy also will form part of the state's comprehensive climate action plan, which is part 2 of US EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, or CPRG. You may have heard recently that we got part 1 award for CPRG of $197 million for climate actions in Oregon, which is a pretty big deal. So we have a lot to live up to in part 2 here. So we're at the very beginning of this process, and we want to hear what you think about how we should be developing the energy strategy. Our team will be explaining to you what the energy strategy is, and along the way asking for your input and comments. We realize that some of you, this may be new information, so it might be helpful to have some time to reflect. So to that end, we've set up an online portal for written comments, and we encourage you to share your written comments there so we don't miss any of your great ideas. We'll paste the link in the chat, and again, we'll put it up at the end of the presentation. We also encourage folks who are interested in learning more about the modeling that is the next phase of this process to listen into yesterday's webinar for the work groups. It'll be posted on our webpage for the project. You can also listen to any or all of the working group meetings if you're interested in any particular topics, and those links and schedule are also be posted on our website. So looking forward to hearing what you have to say and to having you hear your questions that you have for us and your thoughts. So thank you for coming. I'd like to hand it over now to our amazing project manager, Edith Baer, and she's going to talk about the goals of the meeting.
Thanks, Alan. And hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Edith Bayer. I'm Energy Policy Team Lead here at the Oregon Department of Energy, and as Alan said, leading the work on this project. So I just want to get us started by talking about the goals of today's meeting. This is a listening session, and what that means is that we are mostly here to listen, to hear your ideas. That said, we're also framing up a discussion to describe the Oregon energy strategy. What is it? What's the timeline? Why are we here today? So the first goal of today's meeting is to develop a shared understanding of what we're talking about the Oregon energy strategy and what our starting point is. I'll add that we at ODO don't know what it's going to be, what the final product is going to be. And so we're asking you for your thoughts to help inform how this report shapes up. And I'll talk in a bit about what we're being asked to do and what we're being asked to deliver to the governor and legislature next year. And I'll talk a little bit more about where we are on the project, but we're here fundamentally to ask you to help us think through what we focus on in the energy strategy, and specifically what kinds of questions we could explore in the current phase of the project, which focuses on the modeling. Essentially, when I say modeling, we're starting with today's world and looking at what would it take to meet our energy and climate goals to 2050, and what would the benefits and costs of different choices be. So we're here to share and to listen and learn. And I'm going to hand it back to Ben to run us through the agenda and get us to where we can get into listening mode. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Edith. Thank you, Alan. So I'm going to move pretty quickly through a few pieces that will help orient us to how we're going to spend our time together. So just as you heard from Edith, we're really dedicating and built an agenda in alignment with those goals to dedicate time hearing from you all. We have a number of ways throughout our time together that you all can contribute, including some real-time polling, surveys, and of course, active discussion that we'll invite you into. And I'll explain more as we move through our agenda. But again, today is about hearing from you all and limiting the talking at you from Department of Energy project team and really ensuring that the input that you provide is most beneficial to the agency. So I will ask that you have either a phone or your web browser ready because we will use some technology that will be one method of participation. So we're going to spend some time with an overview of the energy strategy, including, as Alan mentioned, some of the modeling scenarios. We'll create some space for Q&A for clarity, so you make sure we're all kind of operating from the same starting place. And then we're going to introduce several topic areas that Department of Energy is seeking feedback on. And so after our group discussion, input opportunity, we'll close with next steps. Folks found their way, of course, if we go to the next slide, onto Zoom, but just a couple helpful tips as we work our way through the conversation today. So we'll encourage you to use the chat for technical assistance. If you go down to the bottom of your screen and click on the chat button, there's kind of two options that you should see. One is to hosts and panelists on the bottom right, or you can click to everyone. So we'll ask that if you need technical assistance, please use hosts and panelists, and one of our project team will make sure you get some support, or use everyone for any type of questions that you'd like to group to respond to, or everyone if you're adding a substantive comment throughout our time together. I don't see anybody on the phone, but if you end up on the phone at any point, you can use your raise hand button on your screen, or you can press *9 if you end up or join by phone. Let's keep going. And I won't spend a lot of time on these group agreements, but we'll ask for you all to center yourselves on these. And as we spend our time together, we really offer these as a best practice. So we ask you to listen carefully to each other, to the team, really seeking out and trying to understand each other's perspectives. We don't assume that folks are coming into this space all from the sharing the same interests or same experiences or same perspectives. So listen to understand, not just to respond. Encourage candid, constructive conversation. Again, this is a listening session, trying to get input, information from you all as experts. We ask that you keep an open mind, again, in this value of trying to understand and seek to learn from others, that you're open, you're transparent, you hold yourself accountable to kind of your actions in this space, that we recognize and respect differing opinions. All the input is valuable. And we recognize that folks may disagree with each other as we have these conversations. We're not coming to any conclusion, but to the extent that folks are building on and working to find common ground in terms of the comments and input that you provide, it's incredibly helpful as Odo does its work. And then for those of you that tend to be the first one with your hands up, we're going to ask you to, maybe step back, or, you'll notice as a facilitator, if I've already called on you or heard from you, I might ask you to wait back in the queue so we can bring other voices in. And if you're someone who tends to take a bit more time to participate, but we're going to ask you to get into that growth zone, not the anxiety zone, but the growth zone. So please, really want to encourage the ability to hear from everyone who's participating today. Let's go to the next slide, and Edith, I'll have you introduce your team.
Yeah, thank you. So I've already introduced myself, and you've met Alan Zelenka, our Assistant Director for Planning and Innovation. We also have here, and you'll hear from her a little bit later, Jessica Rikers, Manager of the Policy and Innovation team here at Odo. And then I just wanted to familiarize folks with our team. And it's organized here by the team leads for each of the working groups. So you can kind of link up the topics that they're leading on with their names. And you can see there are a couple of names for each one. So Direct Fuels and Industry are Michael Friels and Tom Elliott. For Electricity Generating Technologies, Joni Sliger and myself. For transportation, we have Jillian DeMedio, who you'll also hear from today, and Evan Elias. For transmission and distribution, Jason Searman and Rob Delmar. Buildings, Blake Shalide, Stephanie Cruz, and Mary Capriva. For energy efficiency and load flexibility, Andy Cameron and myself. Equity and environmental justice, Lauren Rosenstein, and I'm backing her up. And then land use and natural resources, Michael Friels and Ruchi Sadir. So now you've heard and seen the names at least once. And hopefully they won't be as new next time that you see them or when you hear some of these folks speak a little later in today's webinar. Thanks.
Thanks, Edith. And Ruby, you want to introduce your team?
Yeah, thanks. My name is Ruby Moore Bloom, and I'm a research analyst at the Clean Energy Transition Institute, or CETI, or CETI. And we're a research and analysis nonprofit focused on accelerating an equitable clean energy transition in the Northwest. And joining me for project management, our overall project manager is CETI's executive director, Eileen Quigley, who's also on with us here today. And then we have a technical modeling team, which includes our technical project lead, Jeremy Hargraves from Evolved Energy Research, and Elaine Hart, who is based in Oregon and is at Moment Energy Insights. They are also joined by additional support from Evolved Energy Research. And then we have two equity advisors, Mariah Caballero from the CETI team and Angela Long from Rockcrest Consulting, who is also based here in Oregon.
Great, thank you, Ruby. So I'll introduce my team really briefly. I guess I should have said this earlier. Ben Duncan, Senior Facilitator with Currents and West, one of the consultant teams and the facilitation lead for our group. Gilly Garber-Yartz, process support. I was going to see if you want to wave, Gilly. And Maria Verano, who will be taking notes, ensuring that we're capturing what we hear from folks today. So let's jump in. We're going to introduce a tool that we're going to be using through the rest of the day. So if we go to the next slide, it's called Menti. It's a polling software. This will be a bit of a warm up for you all, get familiar with the technology, a chance to learn a bit about who's in the room together with us. So there's kind of a couple of options that you can use. One, and we'll post this in the chat, you can open a web browser on your computer, on your cell phone, and go to menti.com and type in the code that you see on the screen, 91719268. You can also, if you're familiar with QR codes, you can scan the QR code and that will open up the same link. So Gilly just put the link in the chat. If you click on that, it'll take you, enter the code 91719268, click submit, and move. So we're going to show this same slide several times throughout. It's the same Menti poll that we're going to be using throughout our discussion. So you can keep your browser open or your phone handy. Of course, we're going to keep bringing this up, so you'll always be able to re-enter the polling through the same mechanism. So we're going to start with 3 questions. Hopefully folks are settled in. You got your Menti poll up. I will say if it's easier or if you have technical problems, you can respond in the chat as well, and we'll capture those. But we're going to ask 3 questions, starting with who are you representing today? And so as you respond, you need to click submit, and that will reflect your answer. So I see a few folks that are in there. A few folks maybe still figuring it out. There we go. But we'll give a minute or 2 for folks to respond. Again, the link is in the chat. If you click the link, submit the code, and then you can respond to the question. Menti refuses code. Lou or Gilly, if there's some technical issues, we got some folks it's working, some folks it's not. You know why? There's a typo in our code. It's 7171, not 9171. Thank you, Jillian.
And for folks in the audience, the code is listed at the top of the slide right here. So these will be our joining instructions.
Thank you, Gillian.
Thanks.
That's for our project team. Let's go into the slides that come in the future so we can make that change. All right, let's give it another minute to see, have folks complete this now that hopefully folks are in. So we're all getting warmed up, figuring out how this is going to work. Okay. Just take about 10 more seconds and then we'll go to the next question. Okay, let's move to the next question, and folks haven't submitted that. You can add in the chat. Where in the state do you spend the most time? So let's click at least an estimate of the state. We don't need zip code, address, just a sense of a scatter plot of where folks are joining from. Again, a way to understand who's in the room. Okay, seeing that distribution start showing up. It's always fascinating to see where people are coming from. Got some coast, we got the I-5 corridor, got some central and eastern Oregon. Okay, let's give another 10 seconds or so, folks, to click on the map. Okay, let's move to the last question of this section. So in one word, what are you most interested in hearing about today? And so this will be a one-word answer, and then click submit and it'll show up. Vision. And you'll notice as folks put words that are similar, they'll resize. So we see process, economics, renewables, future, resiliency, strategy. Process and renewables getting a little larger. Let's give 15 more seconds or so, folks, to add their word. Even though I could watch this all day, I love watching word clouds come in. It's one of my favorite things in the world. So again, as you see, understanding the process, metrics, thank you, Eric. Equity, transition. Okay, it's good. Couple more seconds, just because I love watching it, but I will stop. Energy mix. Okay, well, thank you all. And again, we'll be using this throughout the rest of the day. So really appreciate folks kind of getting their muscle memory going as we do this. So I'm gonna all right, last one's in, offshore wind, I see it. All right, let's move on. Edith, I'm gonna pass it to you to introduce the Oregon Energy Strategy. And just so folks know, we're going to ask you to hold any questions until after the presentation for clarity, and then ask that you bring any comments on what you're hearing into our discussion portion. But with that, I'll pass it to you, Edith.
Thanks, Ben. And yeah, those were really cool visuals. I really like that Menti tool. I'm glad we're using it throughout this meeting. So I'd like to start off, if we can go to the next slide, by describing to you all where we are today and how we produce and consume energy. I think it's important to have a starting point. So this is a Sankey diagram. It flows left to right. And it's a kind of flow chart that shows you where our energy comes from. So if you start on the far left side, you kind of have this energy produced, imported electricity, and then energy that's imported. You can see that the starting point is that we don't produce all of the energy that we use. In fact, we don't even produce most of the energy that we use. A lot of it is imported. And that's something that we're taking into account when we're developing the energy strategy. So then this chart, if you kind of jump to the next column of dark colored rectangles. Oh, sorry, not the next slide though. The trigger word is NEXT. So it breaks down what's producing that energy. So we have hydro, wind, if you kind of just your eyes scroll down the slide, natural gas, petroleum, we have some coal up there. So again, not all that is produced in state, but that's those are kind of the sources of the energy. And then what is that energy converted into? That big red rectangle kind of in the middle is electricity. A lot of it is electricity. And then most of the rest are fuels that go into transportation and natural gas that goes into direct uses, everything from heating homes to supporting industrial processes. So there are really 2 points here. I realize if this is the first time you're seeing this, it's a lot. This comes from a report that we publish every 2 years. That report is being updated now. It will be published this fall, our biennial energy report. So there'll be an update to this slide. So, you know, if there are 2 things to take away from this slide, first, we use energy from a lot of different sources for a lot of different purposes. And second, some of that energy is produced in Oregon, and most of that energy is imported and comes from other places. So now if we go to the next slide, it's a little easier here to see where our energy comes from. So you can see on the left, there are some words and then some icons that show you the large share of petroleum, of natural gas, of hydro. We also have some coal, biomass, wind, and other resources in there. So that's what's producing the energy. And on the right is where we're using it. So you can see 29% of that energy goes to cars and trucks and other transportation, 25% goes to homes, 27% supports our industries, and 19% goes to businesses. And so this is really important. I'm going to pause here for a second because our state has ambitious climate goals. We have a 100% clean electricity standard by 2040 for our largest utilities. We have a 90% goal for reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from fuels, and an 80% economy-wide reduction goal by 2050. And so if you look at this pie chart here, it shows you where those reductions need to happen. They need to happen in the places that are the sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And that's gas, it's petroleum, and coal primarily. There's the process of developing the energy strategy is to inform kind of how we do that, what our options are, and what different options mean for Oregonians. And so this is kind of the starting point of where we are and what our challenge is. I'll just add that there are other challenges that we're very clearly facing in our energy sector, everything from really fast load growth to how we harden the transmission system to deal with wildfires. So it's not just about decarbonization, it's about how we shift to a clean energy mix while addressing these other challenges that we're facing. So if we go to the next slide, why do we need an energy strategy to do this? I've already talking about it. We have ambitious energy and climate goals. They cover electricity, transportation, direct use fuels, And so the goals are bigger than any specific sector or process or regulation or agency. And there are relationships between these different areas. Think of electric vehicles. You might switch to an electric vehicle, and then you're using electricity rather than gas, and that changes that big picture fuel mix. And there are a lot of things, as I said, going on at the same time. We have changing weather patterns affecting hydro levels. We have a lot of challenges and a lot of things to think about. So what we did a couple of years ago in our last biennial energy report in 2022 was ask ourselves how Oregon might meet those goals and what have others done. So we looked at about 20 studies, and we concluded that, first of all, this is doable, but there are multiple ways to get to our goals. And that means that we have choices. And it's important to understand the benefits and costs of these different choices. We also know that failing to meet our goals will have really strong impacts, and those impacts are not evenly distributed. So this is really important. And finally, we need to work together to meet our goals. And that's part of why we're having this listening session today, to listen to you all. If we go to the next slide. So now to the bill that directs ODO to develop this energy strategy. It's HB 3630. It directs us to lead development of an energy strategy. By us, I mean the Oregon Department of Energy, to develop an energy strategy that identifies pathways to achieve our state's clean energy policy objectives and our broader energy policy objectives. And the strategy needs to be informed by views from the public, from other agencies, from tribes. And we also are taking into account existing plans, existing studies, existing analyses that have already been done. And we need to account for a variety of factors. It's not just about the energy mix, it's about the costs, about the efficiency, the feasibility of different pathways. We're going to talk about economic and employment impacts. It's really important to keep in mind energy burden, affordability, environmental justice, and community impacts and benefits. Land use and natural resources are a really big area that's affected by how we produce and use energy. And energy resilience, security, and discussions around regional electricity markets are all really important. Go to the next slide. I'm almost done here. So I just want to pause for a moment. So the bill talks about pathways to meeting our state's energy policy objectives. And so here are the 3 objectives that are driving the shape of our energy sector. We have an economy-wide greenhouse gas emission reduction target of 80% reductions by 2050, and that's embodied in Executive Order 2004. We have this 100% clean electricity standard by 2040 that I mentioned earlier, and we have the Climate Protection Program, which is where that 90% greenhouse gas reductions by 2050 comes in, and that program is in rulemaking right now. And then we have a whole bunch of other policies that you see in that rectangle below that really drive and shape how we meet these goals. Having a goal is good, but it doesn't tell you how to meet it. And so we have a lot of existing programs and policies. We have the Clean Fuels Program, Advanced Clean Cars 2, Advanced Clean Trucks. We have building codes, appliance standards, and lots of other policies that help shape how we meet our goals. If we go to the next slide. So you just saw a summary of our high-level climate goals. And if we step back and look around, there are more ambitious targets floating around. Washington has set a goal of 95% below 1990 levels by 2050 across their economy. The Oregon Climate Action Commission has recommended a similar target for Oregon based on an evaluation of the science and of our existing policies and programs. And the federal government has set a goal for the country of a net zero economy by 2050. So the purpose of the Oregon Energy Strategy is to evaluate pathways and trade-offs. And it's meant to be a mechanism that informs our policy discussions. We've hired some really smart consultants with the modeling capacity to look at different pathways and at different options. And one way that we could leverage this opportunity to inform our thinking is by understanding the implications of a more ambitious target for Oregon. So this would, I just want to be clear, we're not talking about a policy recommendation. What we're talking about is an analysis to help us understand what the implications would be of a more ambitious targets in terms of the costs, what would need to happen, what would be the benefits, what would be the challenges. So we want to put this question to you, and we want to hear about your views on whether you'd be interested or not, or maybe you're not really sure about exploring the implications of what a more ambitious target might mean. So we've teed up a poll to try and just get your initial views on this. And I'll just say that this is a big question, and I'm sure folks have views all across the spectrum. And we have a post-webinar survey that will pop up when this webinar closes. And we encourage you to respond to this question. It'll be in there too. With a little bit more time for reflection, you'll have, I think, a week to respond to that poll. So this is just to get your initial views. And I'm going to hand it back to Ben to MC the results as they come in.
Well, you teed it up really well. So again, the Menti poll, hopefully you can see real-time adjustment 7171968. You can also use the QR code. So hopefully folks are back into the Menti, and it's in the chat as well. So let's pull up the question. It's really around, as Edith teed up, your level of, look at people are already in there. I love it. What is your level of interest in exploring a more ambitious target? And you'll see the bar graphs will change as folks respond. So let's give about 30 seconds for folks that are choosing to participate. So again, remember that you have to click submit if you've chosen an answer, and then it'll show up on in the poll. All right, let's do the 10-second countdown in your head. Okay, well, let's keep going. Thank you. Edith, I muted you because I think you were typing really quickly. So you can unmute yourself. So let's keep going.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I appreciate your ability to mute me when I'm being disruptive. So I just have a couple more slides. The first one is just to summarize what's going to go into the final report for the energy strategy. So there'll be a summary of these pathways to achieving Oregon's policy objectives. We'll have a section on recommendations for policy options, and the discussion around the policy options will be informed by the technical analysis. So those discussions are going to start early next year. And then we'll have a description of how we engaged with folks and how different perspectives informed the strategy. And if we go to the next slide, we have a process for this. Right now, we're undergoing the technical part of the project. We're collecting views through this meeting, through working groups. We also have an advisory group and a group of different state agencies that get together. We're consulting with tribes, with EJ and equity focused groups, and providing some webinars. And that's kind of the structure that we've built in, both to inform this part of the project where we're talking about the technical and modeling piece. We'll do the same for the policy recommendations early next year. And then, as you can see here, and we'll share these slides afterwards, where we've built in some additional opportunities for feedback when we have initial results coming in. Next slide, please. So this is another way to look at it. This is just a timeline with key deliverables. So as you can see, the modeling from engaging and getting feedback to running the model and getting some preliminary results will take us through the end of this year. And then next year, we'll start to dig into policy recommendations where there might be gaps, opportunities to meet our goals where we see that some more action might be needed. And then the draft report is due in November 1st of 2025. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll hand it back to you, Ben. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Edith. Let's bring Ruby in to do, again, an introduction to the scenario model.
Great, thanks so much. Again, my name is Ruby, technical project lead with technical project manager with CETI. on this project. And you can go to the next slide. Starting with the purpose of this type of energy pathways modeling, Edith teed everything up really helpfully for this. And this energy pathways modeling that our team is providing at its core is not trying to predict the future, but it's rather trying to help inform decision making. Edith was talking about trade-offs, and evaluating different pathways in the modeling can help highlight the pros and cons of different options, and then help us identify strategies that could manage or mitigate certain uncertainty. Again, not trying to predict the future, but rather examining the effects of various choices in the energy system. And the modeling will look out to 2050, but we'll also really be thinking about near-term actions that would be needed to get on that path to meeting emissions and energy goals. And the modeling will help us identify gaps and opportunities along the way. Next slide. The type of modeling that we are doing is economy-wide least cost energy system optimization, looking at Oregon in the context of the 11 Western states. So what does that mean? Economy-wide, we are looking at the entire energy sector and economy, so all forms of energy across both supply and demand, if you can picture that Sankey diagram that Edith shared. So we're looking beyond just the electricity sector, including the fuel sector. Importantly, the model is structured to meet Oregon's energy policy objectives, and the greenhouse gas emissions are modeled to be reduced over time to meet those emissions targets. The model is grounded in ensuring reliability and looking for least cost solutions. And as you can see in this, the image here of the geography, we look at Oregon's energy system in the context of the 11 Western states, because Oregon does not exist in a vacuum. It's a vital part of a very dynamic energy system in the West, and clean energy advances in other Western states also impact the availability and cost of solutions in Oregon. Next slide. So here's a visual to help explain what the model is doing. At a high level, the model is calculating the energy needed to power Oregon's economy, and then the least cost way to provide that energy under clean electricity and emissions goals. So starting on the left, you can see we start with a model of Oregon's current economy in residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation sectors. The model then calculates the energy needs of that economy through electricity, transportation fuels, and direct use fuels. So now I'm in the middle box. And then moving to that last box on the right, the model calculates the least cost energy supply to meet those energy needs. And that supply is constrained by clean energy goals, and then also maintains reliability and meets energy policies. Next slide. One of the main features of this modeling effort is the comparison between a reference scenario and additional scenarios. So you can see in this image, the reference scenario is in the middle there. And for the reference scenario, we are developing an Oregon-specific database and defining certain assumptions. And we will then develop a set of 5 additional scenarios that investigate key questions by changing assumptions from the reference scenario. And this is really key to mention here, because we are looking to all of you to help us understand what are the most pressing questions or uncertainties or state priorities that can help us develop these questions and scenarios that we want to model. Next slide. A little more detail on what these key questions might look like. So we use the format of what if questions to frame each scenario. And you can see those examples in the blue box. For example, you might want to ask questions like, what if developing clean energy resources is delayed? Or what if transmission expansion to access resources outside of Oregon is harder than expected? Each of these what if questions then translates into a scenario that would change something from the reference scenario, so we can compare the two and understand trade-offs of one pathway versus another. Next slide. Lastly, there are many cross-cutting issues that we will also consider in the analysis. Some of these are through the energy pathways modeling itself, some are through additional analysis, and some are considered in the evaluation of the results and the development of policy recommendations, which, as Edith mentioned, comes early in 2025. So these considerations include economic and employment effects of various energy pathways, considerations about energy burden and affordability, energy resilience and energy reliability, environmental justice, land use considerations and natural resource impacts, and community benefits and community energy resilience. And with that, I will pass it back to Ben.
Great,
Thank you.
thanks. So I'll just ask that if folks have any questions for clarity, that you ask in the chat, and we'll do our best to respond. We do want to keep moving, so we have enough time to really hear from you all. So if we can go to the next slide, we're going to bring up, or actually, Edith, do you want to? I guess we should. Do you want to kind of lay out how we're going to move through this next session first?
Yeah, maybe I think that's a good idea. So I just want to tee up how we've structured the conversation so that you can anticipate what the kind of how we're structuring the conversation and how you can engage. It's difficult to have a conversation in a virtual meeting kind of on flat screens with lots of folks attending. So here's what we've done. First, we've divided the conversation into 4 topics. So we have some dedicated time to talk about electricity, to talk about fuels, about transportation, and about energy efficiency and demand side resources. And we've teed up some questions in each of those areas, kind of under each of those headings. Those questions will repeat themselves so that you'll kind of get into a groove. And we'll have a hybrid way of collecting your views. You can type your answer and it'll come up on the screen. There'll be we'll continue to use the Menti app for that. And we will work to speak to those answers as we see them coming up. And we will also open up the floor for comments. So you can also, then we'll explain how you can raise your hand or signal that you would like to speak. We ask that you keep your comments to about 1 minute to allow others to speak, so to be as concise as possible. And I want to recognize there are a lot more topics than the 4 that I've just mentioned. Equity, environmental justice, land use, natural resources, jobs. Ruby kind of listed a lot of these cross-cutting considerations. And those kind of intersect with energy in different ways. And so what we'd like to encourage folks to do is to just bring those questions in where you see them coming up. And if they come up in more than one place, then by all means, bring it up in more than one place. So, you know, if you're concerned about the cost of electricity or fuels, put your comment in both places, for example. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Ben. We'll have kind of a quick practice round to make sure everybody's comfortable with how we're teeing things up, and we'll run through the conversation. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Edith. So again, the Menti poll, hopefully folks are old hands at this point. So we're going to ask our first question, and then as Edith said, we'll move into some of the topic areas. So first question, please share with us why you are attending and what your interest is in an energy strategy. Now, this is the first time that it's a kind of open-ended question. You get 200 characters. So that's not a ton of writing, but you also, for those that would like to submit longer comments, we'll be sharing a link to a comment form at the end of the meeting. But we're also certainly can raise your hand if you'd like to answer any of the questions that are going to be upcoming. *9 if you're on the phone, and you can, we'll prompt you to unmute and contribute. So right now we'll give a minute or so for folks to respond to that. This will be a typed in question. And again, it's limited to the 200 characters. Thank you. So build a zero emission economy for the assured economic prosperity for Oregon. We're kind of thinking about generations coming up behind us and the protection and preservation of our ecosystems. Work at the political level for carbon reduction. Intersections with resiliency work at the city. Offshore wind and how that's being considered. Make sure we stay in the know about energy policies that can impact tribal land and resources. Alignment with clean energy goals, so a lot of local intersections. Impacts on small rural communities, particularly those that are isolated. So let's give just another 30 seconds or so for comments to come in. And again, we're going to share other resources at the end, so you all can continue to contribute. But this is really helpful to see. Rapid, equitable, least cost way to reduce GHGs. Care about Oregon's environment as an Oregonian and livelihoods, hydropower. Help inform the strategy to implement solar and other renewables and battery storage for tribal sovereignty. Right. Thank you all. So we're going to move into our first topic. And so this will be very similar. We're going to have a topic, as Edith said, and then we'll have some other questions. As a reminder, as we do this, you also can raise your hand if you'd like to provide input verbally. We really want to make sure you all can engage in the way that's most effective for you. So Jessica, why don't you lead us off in the electricity topic, and then we'll dive into a couple questions.
Happy to. Thank you so much, Ben. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see people here today, or at least see the names of people. I guess I can't really see the people. So what you're seeing in front of you right now is our electricity resource mix, meaning what are the generation resources that Oregon uses to meet our electricity load. And some of these are in the state, some of them are located out of state, but they all serve Oregon customers. And as you can see, we have a big reliance on hydro, but we also have a lot of coal and natural gas in the mix. And what would be really cool is if I could show you how the resource mix has changed over time. We used to have a lot more coal. In fact, when we have the 2022 data, which is imminent and will be updated soon, you'll see that the coal amount has dropped even more. And we see a lot more representation from natural gas, but also from wind and solar. So this is changing over time. And as a result, we're thinking about what it is that might be of interest as we're considering how changes will be occurring in the electricity mix over time. And the focus of the next few questions will be around what you might be interested in better understanding when it comes to the future of our electricity resources and how we can achieve our clean electricity goals in a cost-effective manner, and while considering things like energy resilience and equity considerations, like where resources might be built and how we use those resources. So all of those questions will be things that we're interested in. This is specific today to the model. And so understanding how the model can provide us with some of that information is sort of the focus of where we want to go with these questions. Next slide, Ben. So as you can see, we have a very large goal, which is to achieve 100% clean electricity by 2040. That was from House Bill 2021, which passed in coincidentally 2021. It makes it easy to remember that year. And so what we're showing right here is that those coal and natural gas resources, we need to find opportunities and options to make sure that those are covered by things that would fit into the HB 2021 goal. And there are a lot of questions around that. What types of generation could be used? And is there enough transmission to be able to bring that those resources online and get the electricity where it needs to go? And then the potentially use the electricity that would be available where we use it. So things like, could electric vehicle batteries play a role in meeting our electricity goals? Or could smart water heaters and smart thermostats help with reducing demand when we need it? So there's a lot of things to consider. The electricity sector has a lot of moving pieces in it, and I'm really glad that we have CETI here to help us model it, because it's just a lot. So these are things to be ruminating about as we're starting to work on the next on these questions that we have for you. So next slide, Ben. All right, so here we have the Menti QR code, and you can also go to menti.com and type in that code there. Make sure we're using the 7171 at the beginning, and you type that code in. And we've got a few questions for you. So I will, I believe, hand it back to Ben.
Yes, so again, just reminding folks, one of the things that Odo is interested is hearing the type of questions that are emerging from this listening session. So you can see we're going to start, we're going to ask the same set of questions for each of the topics. But the first question, what are your biggest questions or concerns for the electricity sector in Oregon? And I'm already seeing a couple questions in the chat that I think are reflective of the type of things that we want to hear. Does solar include residential rooftop? Will the strategy be using a full life cycle approach and not simply end use? Those are the type of things that, rather than answer today, we want to hear from you all. So again, this is a 200 character. As folks are inputting their responses, you can also raise your hand if you'd like to offer input verbally, or if it's easier for you to use the chat. So again, what are your biggest questions or concerns for the electricity sector in Oregon? And again, the raise hand button's on the bottom of your screen, *9 if you're on the phone. So maintenance of existing carbon-free hydropower for reliability and affordability. How we guarantee adequate transmission capacity.
I think that's a question we've been hearing a lot, is the question around what transmission capacity will be like going forward. It's a great one, thank you.
What strategies can be developed to help cut through the red tape to developing solar facility, community, and utility scale, meeting HB 2021 goals in a way that maintains energy affordability, improves resilience, maximizing community-based renewable? Are we ignoring the root cause of lack of DERs, namely in our obsolete utility business model? How to take advantage of reducing wasted electricity? Renewables are properly developed. I have to scroll down, team. Thank you. So you'll see all these things coming in real time. Renewables properly developed with social and environmental considerations, source of generation, replacing coal, natural gas. How much are we willing to import? Privately owned utilities. Interconnection study times. Lack of discussion regarding clean hydrogen advanced in Europe as green hydrogen to fuel all vehicle types. Data center growth. Okay. Let's give about 30 more seconds for any other comments. And a reminder, you can always use your human voice, which is an option. So feel free to bring your voice into the room as well by raising your hand. Okay, let's go to the next question around what you're most enthusiastic about in the electricity sector. I think we probably saw some of this where folks are already sharing some enthusiasm or imagining possibility. So same process. And again, a reminder, don't be afraid to raise that hand and say it out loud. So we'll give folks a couple minutes to respond to this question. Clean electricity, making clean hydrogen from water. So enthusiasm about the possibilities of renewables. New ideas, resilience, affordable storage, dispersed sources.
Really like that comment, Ben, on new ideas that haven't been developed yet. And I have a lot of questions around what new technologies might be available in the future that we don't even know about today, and how we might consider that uncertainty when we're thinking about the model and when we're thinking next year about policy options. So any questions around that float to the top would be great to add to.
Yeah, thank you. Folks naming geothermal, the environmental benefits, partnerships with natural gas utilities to minimize climate, diversifying energy sources, building resilience. still waiting for that brave soul who's gonna raise their hand and offer verbal input, but again, we want to make sure folks are doing it in the way that works best for you. So if this works best, that's great. And just so you know, you can't just unmute yourself and chime in, you do have to raise your hand. Lowering energy costs, opportunities for small business, and behind the meter applications. Okay. Let's give another 30 seconds, and then we'll move to the last question of this section. Energy costs for the average person. It's seeking opportunities that don't have negative environmental impacts. Okay, let's go to the third question. And this would, what would you like the model to tell us regarding electricity? What are you most interested in learning? So as you heard from Ruby, around the models, what are you most interested in understanding?
I think a couple things that we've heard frequently so far are what the cost might look like if we don't have access to as much transmission as we might need. And also what the cost differences might be between a lot of large scale solar and storage versus rooftop solar and storage. So just as food for thought for the types of questions that we've been hearing about in this area.
Thank you, Jessica. Yep, so the transmission versus storing electricity, producing locally, least cost options and trade-offs, the forecastings for heat pumps, electric vehicles, etc., the quote energy wallet. So I actually don't know what that means. So this could be an opportunity to explain to your facilitator what an energy wallet is if you wanted to raise your hand and come off mute. Draw you in somehow. The actual cost of transmission and distribution, cost comparisons, impacts on energy prices for end use customers, cost benefit of emerging technologies like wave energy, including transmission and maintenance. Expanding the definition of least cost to include added value of non-toxicity, equity, universal access, health benefits to environment from clean energy. Very connected. That may have been you, Eric. I saw your question earlier in the chat around how that's calculated and does it include the social costs, costs and benefits, how to change from the idea of needing to provide all the electricity is demanded to living on a constrained energy budget. Thank you. Wallet equals affordability of options. Thank you. High, medium, and low scenarios for hydropower. This is great. Well, thank you, folks. Oh, Jessica, jump in.
I was just say really good questions. Appreciate people's input.
Yeah, so this is good modeling for how we're going to move through the rest of our conversation. Line loss calculations, PQ sources. This is great, and we'll be providing again a survey at the end. So as you think of other things and want to add more contributions, there'll be other opportunities to do so. But just staying mindful of time. I want to pass it on to Michael to move us into direct use fuels discussion. And again, folks, hopefully you're now understanding how we're going to move through this, so it'll be relatively seamless. Hopefully, Michael, take it away.
Thank you, Ben. So I'm Michael Friels. I'm a senior policy analyst in the Oregon Department of Energy, and I'm interested in your energy strategy questions and thoughts around how Oregon produces and consumes direct use fuels. And I do want to clarify what I mean by direct use fuels. Can we move to the next slide? So these are the fuels that Oregon uses in the residential, commercial, and industrial sectors for cooking, space heating, supporting manufacturing or industrial processes. So these aren't the fuels we use to generate electricity or for transportation. These are your fuels like natural gas to for your furnace or your water heater or your range, or maybe the wood biomass used by facilities to heat the building, or for manufacturing or other industrial purposes. So a variety of these fuels. And as you could see, natural gas is our largest proportion, and then we've got biomass. And if we'll change to the next slide, we can take a look at how these fuels have changed over time. So within Oregon, energy consumption from direct fuels has evolved quite a bit, and it will continue to evolve due to existing state and federal policy, as well as market changes. And so I imagine there's a lot of questions around this and how it will change. And it's also interesting to note that, Oregon produces most of the biomass that it uses within the state, but a lot of all the petroleum fuels that we use for direct use fuels are imported into the state. And so we are curious about kind of what your interests are around this, what your concerns are, and following the same pattern that Jessica just modeled for us, we'll have the similar questions. And I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Unmute. So as Michael said, we're going to follow the same piece. So hopefully this is a quick process. You probably memorize your code, but we'll leave it there for a second. Kelly, just make sure people are in. I guess we flashed on it. All right. So biggest questions are go back and forth, back and forth, back. Hopefully folks are in. So what are your biggest questions or concerns for the direct use fuel sector in Oregon? And again, you can add to the Menti poll 200 characters, or feel free to raise your hand, get in the queue, and offer input verbally. And I'll just note that the Odo is collecting all these questions and plans to provide a way to answer those questions after some thoughtful consideration. But these are really to inform Odo as it does its work. So thank you for continuing to ask the questions and naming the concerns. Will energy choice be eroded? How can we implement an orderly shutdown of the methane grid? Can much of this use be electrified? Availability during emergencies, economics around direct use fuels. The chart that was just shared clearly shows that biomass dropped dramatically when natural gas went up. That was dollar driven. The biofuels are energy intensive to produce, they're not waste products. Transportation emissions, for example, to get them to Oregon. Diesel fuel is critical for backup energy. For example, distributed wastewater water pumps. Solar is not an option in the winter. There's solutions for that. So these very helpful sharing of concerns and considerations, vision. How can we equitably decarbonize or move away from emitting direct use fuels? All energy can be produced in Oregon using clean hydrogen. Renewables in Oregon can produce the clean hydrogen fuel for all transportation, residential, commercial. Are you considering moving towards certain electric alternatives?
Yeah, so I think this is all great feedback. I think it highlights the interest in what the alternatives are available for direct use fuels, what the future might bring for that, as well as kind of the concerns around cost and the resilience concerns around switching all to electrification, or what are the opportunities to have access to these fuels and their availability.
Impacts on prices. Yeah, let's give 30 more seconds on this one. Okay, let's move to the next question. What are you most enthusiastic about in the direct use fuels sector? Again, folks can use the Menti poll. You can add questions in the chat as some folks have, and I'll just keep offering until it becomes a reality that you can raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can bring your human voice into the room. So enthusiastic about hydrogen. Biomass and biogas bringing new value to waste or energy byproducts. Eliminating methane and ultimately hydrogen leaks. The standard is non-toxicity and energy independence, and advancing clean hydrogen should be our center focus with no imports or toxicity required. The impacts of natural gas on household environmental quality, reducing consumption of direct fuels, saving billions of dollars on gasoline and diesel. Electricity or hydrogen are much cheaper, switching from carbon emitting to renewable sourced. Consumption and substitution of cleaner alternatives. Lifting up the opportunities for conservation, phasing out natural gas. And this is what are you enthusiastic about? We'll give folks another minute or so. I'm not seeing any more responses coming in on this question. So let's go to the third question. What would you like the model to tell us regarding direct use fuels? What are you most interested in learning? As we wait anxiously to see what pops up. How to reduce usage. Patterns and assumptions, I imagine, of consumption shifts over time. What end uses cannot be electrified or decarbonized with current tech? Connecting back to what are the things that we don't even know exist or could exist in the future? What are the critical uses that do not have economically viable alternatives? What's the use threshold where delivery of natural gas becomes too expensive relative to product and utility enters the death spiral? Benefits and co-benefits of substituting electricity for direct use fuels. Policies that the city can adopt to help transition. Cost comparisons of methane versus electrified buildings, including SEC and toxicities. Public health and air quality improvements. What's needed to have a decarbonized gas grid? Okay. No, thank you for that. Understanding who is reliant on direct use fuels and what alternatives do they have, and how is Oregon going to enable that transition? Right. Let's give another 30 seconds or so for some more responses. Are there any scenarios which satisfy all of our aspirational conditions? Ted, I see your comment no longer showing up on the screen. You might have to click submit to make sure it gets entered, but feel free to throw it in the chat, Ted. Or you could raise your hand, Ted, and we could hear you speak to your answers. Yay, Ted. Let's promote Ted. Let's hear you, a real human voice. You can unmute. There you go. You're unmuted, Ted, but we can't hear you right now. I'm not hearing you.
Showing
see.
unmuted on my screen, but
It's showing unmuted.
might need to set his microphone settings.
Yeah.
See.
I don't think we can do anything on our end. We were very excited though to hear from you, Ted. So maybe check, if you click on your audio button on the bottom left on the little caret, go to audio settings, make sure your microphone's working. As Ted is doing that, I'll just, other scenarios, all of our aspiration, can concrete manufacturing be decarbonized? Double check the keyboard. We're trying, Ted, we want to hear from you so bad. Well, let's move on, and Ted, if we hear your voice, we'll just pause, okay? If it works, so we'll keep you promoted, and if we hear you, we'll pause it and move back in. So let's move to Jillian for transportation.
Great, thank you, Ben. And good morning, everybody. My name is Jillian DeMedio. I'm a senior policy analyst with this ODO team and the transportation lead for this project. So I am interested now in hearing your questions and thoughts about transportation in Oregon. Next slide. So really quickly, before jumping into our questions for you, which again will be modeled after the last two sections we just went through, I just want to briefly set the stage and talk about transportation in Oregon. I'm sure you've all heard that the transportation sector is actually the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon, constitutes about 35% of all of our emissions. And this is largely because transportation is currently dependent on fossil fuels like gasoline and diesel. You can see in this pie chart our current mix of transportation fuels with using data from 2020. And imported petroleum fuels make up more than 90% of what we consume in terms of transportation fuels in Oregon. The way we power transportation, however, is changing with the adoption of electric vehicles. Can you go to the next slide? So some of this, of course, is consumer driven. Some consumers are choosing EVs on their own merit. They may like the way that they drive versus conventional vehicles. But some of this adoption is going to be policy driven as well. Edith already mentioned our climate protection program, which will require a 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from transportation fuels by 2050. And so looking out to 2050, you can see that our transportation fuels picture is really going to look quite different than it does today. We're likely to see a lot more zero emission vehicles on our roads. So with this, we're interested in understanding your thoughts and concerns around this transition. And we can jump into our questions, Ben.
Thank you. So we'll just flash this again, just make sure folks can get in. Yeah, please just, chat, sorry, we'll put your comments in the chat and we'll make sure they're collected. Okay, let's move into same set of questions. So the first question, what are your biggest questions or concerns for the transportation sector in Oregon? Again, you can use your Menti, you can use the chat, you can use your human voice. I feel like we need someone else to raise their hand so we can test to make sure that it was just Ted and not our systemic issue. Toby, jump on in, please. Let's promote Toby and we'll see if we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Toby.
Oh, wonderful. Hey, thank you so much for all you're doing, everyone. Very well done. Very important. Means everything to everyone in Oregon, well, and beyond. We're talking about energy, right? So thank you so much. Transportation. Now, we kind of touched on all of these different sectors, but it's kind of interesting to kind of pull it all together into a paradigm where everything is kind of simplified and reduced to actual infrastructure, gets the job done, and try and minimize all of the bad side of an energy strategy. So, but we're in transportation, so I just wanted to comment that, in the big picture, if there were one solution that would be able to fuel all vehicles, maritime, aviation, residential, commercial, industrial, in other words, is there actually some solution that we could reduce all this complexity to, that Oregon could apply, perhaps be a leader in, and show the rest of the world how we do it in the pioneer state? That self-reliance and independence, these are all values that aren't just platitudes, that no, this is how we live. And so again, I take you to what would satisfy all of the conditions that everyone wants. And it's like, we want low cost, it's got to be safe, it's got to be potent, available to everyone, produced in Oregon, least toxic materials, lowest water consumption, reliable, sustainable, robust, has to survive this environment, 100% non-toxic, right? We got to have that. And it creates jobs. And after all of that you've done, it has to have the least impact on water and soil and air and biology. So if we make that the standard and then ask, okay, all of our possibilities, if we run it through that filter, does anything get through? Is there anything that actually can do all those things simultaneously? And so when I run it through, if you put LEDs on those goals, a few light up, some solutions give you 3, some 5, but I have 13 conditions that have to be, you just heard, I'm satisfied. And when I do that, there's only really 2 things that come through, and they're delineated to light duty loads and heavy duty loads. With light duty, it's solar and storage. Solar can be any renewable, storage can be anything that's non-hazardous and up to code. And that can do residential. You do DC fast charge with solar assisted charging stations in parking lots. No new land, drop it in. People have this. No additional load to the grid. You use it to absorb excess renewable energy. And then for everything else, all the heavy stuff we talked about, it's clean hydrogen. The Europeans have been championing this a long time. They're state of the art. If we did this in Oregon and said, everything, the economy, the environment, our humanity, our life, and our future all actually need to work together. And this is one water cycle that entirely decarbonizes everything we do. Now, I know you don't have clean hydrogen in Oregon yet, but if you had a 5-year plan, if you said to the kids, hey, by 2050, everything's going to be fine, I think it's easy to promise what your kids are going to do. But we should only concentrate on this decade and what we can achieve now for the next 5 or 6 years. That would make the most sense to young people. It would have the most potency. And so there is a way to actually solar power Oregon. I did a calculation I can show you. It's about 40 square miles of solar, but we're a 100,000 square mile state. You spread it out. You can do all of this without imports. We can be entirely energy independent. And your Sankey diagram could be redrawn where all of your primary energy sources are originating in Oregon. You use electrolyzers to take all your excess electricity, make clean hydrogen fuel. You use fuel cells to then convert that fuel back into electricity, returning most of the water back. So wonderful. I don't want to take any more of your time, but there is one universal solution. The Europeans have declared it. They're going for it. I think if Oregon put our dedication to those values we talked about, I think we could create this zero emission economy. That's got to be our vision. I don't know how we could do better than that. No, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Toby. I appreciate kind of the visionary language that you're using, and just the idea of maximizing the kind of co-benefits and minimizing the negative impacts. So appreciate you bringing your voice into the room. I'm seeing a number of questions, concerns, balancing taxes on gas versus EV uptake, rapidly increasing EV adoptions across the state, encouraging solar over parking lots, charging stations. So some of the infrastructure build out. What are we going to do about long haul? Are we taking all things into consideration about EVs, such as vehicle weight, tire wear, et cetera? Funding public transportation, offset loss in gas tax as EVs and improved mileage move forward. Mass transit, recognizing the challenges in rural communities, environments, charging infrastructure, again, the inability of the grid to meet really high electricity or electrification scenarios. So that overlay of reliability and infrastructure upgrades to meet the demand, getting people off the road. Right. Thank you for all of that. Well, let's move to the second question around what you're most enthusiastic about as you think about the transportation sector. That's the enthusiasm question. Toby gave us some enthusiasm around what's possible and a vision for a future. Relationship of EV technology and reduction in air pollution. Expanding the use of bicycles as a transportation option. Noise pollution. Just already seeing it is happening already with more electric bikes and scooters for local trips. Smelling clean air with zero emission vehicles. Thinking about the children have been named a number of times, getting kids out of those diesel buses, better walkability in communities for healthier people on the planet. Focus on public fleets to zero emission. Again, e-bikes, reducing car miles, building out a middle speed system between sidewalks and car roads. Shift towards high-speed rail, public transit infrastructure overall. Broader price points for EVs, costs coming down to more affordable levels. Decarbonizing what we can to the extent feasibly possible, and mobility is what has made the country the best place in the world to live. And really channeling what folks are excited about, what you're enthusiastic about the possibilities of the transportation sector. Another minute or so. And again, if anyone wants to raise hand and come in for verbal input, of course, that's welcome. Local delivery trucks. About the local realities of transportation. Okay, last call for enthusiasm. There we go. To decarbonizing with a water cycle. For the renewables, electrolyzers, storage, and fuel cells. Okay, let's move to the last question around what would you like the model to tell us regarding transportation? What are you most interested in learning? As you think about modeling scenarios regarding our current and future transportation state, what are you most interested in learning? Might be a moment, Jillian. I don't know if there's things you've heard from folks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can share some examples here. Yeah, I think we're seeing it now, realistic pace for this transition. So we could look at how the pace of EV adoption affects the overall cost of decarbonizing our economy. We can look at how reductions in how many miles people drive, how that will impact the transition and the cost of the transition and the demands on the energy system. Those are some examples, but I see stuff coming in here now.
Yep. So the adoption rates, pace, supporting rural, mix of modes. stop squandering transportation on moving quote stuff around. Regional mass transit can be optimized. Life cycle cost per mile. Go deep in modeling such as road repair costs, etc. Distributed solar storage, implementation of CFEC state laws that support transportation decarbonization. Can the grid handle the large numbers of EVs, particularly in non-valley regions? Massive fuel savings with electrified vehicles and how faster adoptions accelerate those savings and storage advantages with VGI. Give another minute or so for folks to add here or to raise hands and come into the conversation. Yeah, Sarah, let's promote you. Thank you.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Sarah. Jump in.
Okay, great. So this is kind of a question. I feel like it could be applicable to the other categories too, but thinking about the transition, the EVs specifically, just makes me wonder kind of what your strategies would be for engaging in kind of this conversation with folks in Oregon who may be less receptive to the idea that we need to transition to EVs and that we need alternatives, renewable energy alternatives. I'm just curious if you guys have kind of considered how you can kind of bring this model to different audiences. And yeah, because sometimes what I've seen in my work is that a lot of the technology is here. It's more of the barrier of social opposition is sometimes that can be stronger than technological barriers. Yeah, and it's okay if you guys don't have an answer to that. It was on my mind.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I don't know, Odo. I mean, there's a couple structural examples, right, in terms of bringing forward working groups, having these type of listening sessions, engaging kind of the engagement strategy. So I don't know if you want to speak to that, but Sarah, you might just be naming something that is one of the challenges of developing an energy strategy that does work for and gets buy-in across, you know, a state like this. So Jessica, do you want to take it from
that it's really we have this really great opportunity right now to ask questions. Like, we at Odo are very curious people, and I think that a lot of us have questions about all the potential ways that we could work to achieving our energy goals and our climate goals. And so this is a really good opportunity to ask those questions, and let's see if the model can answer them. Models can't do everything, as Edith indicated in front, but getting answers to questions helps us make decisions. So I think that that's an important part of all of this. So that was a great flag from Sarah, and we want to hear all the questions that people have, so that we can start to have some really great conversations about what we do to meet those goals, or what we think we should do to meet those goals, which will happen next year. So there's a place for that as well.
Thank you, Jessica. And certainly to your point, Sarah, I mean, it's a real obligation and opportunity for Odo as think about engaging folks around the state to understand kind of how people are entering these conversations. What are the barriers to adoption? What are the kind of concerns? And I know, take it off maybe facilitator a little bit, you know, having a conversation years ago with folks talking, particularly in more rural communities, said, you know, when the F-150 comes out with an electric that can pull my trailer, then come back and talk to me. And I know that we're in that world. And so as we're, you know, folks that might have been resistant because of the pragmatic and realities of daily lives, may be able to shift. So I use that just as an example, but I think that's a really important commentary for all of the work that the energy strategy engagement process will need to bring in. So love that you posed that question. I think it's going to take a lot of us thinking about how to build that energy, no pun intended, you know, to develop strategies that actually work. in real people's lives. Thank you for that. And Jillian, thank you for your comment as well. I think thinking through how we engage communities is really important. So seeing a lot of responses here around low, medium, and high scenarios, and additional generation that would be needed, both at a utility scale and behind the meter, interventions that might be needed in the building sector, including building codes to support transportation decarbonization. How do we help businesses transition to renewable energy and avoid passing the cost on to customers? Can batteries of idle EVs be used for storage, public health and air quality, faster adoptions, accelerated savings? So lots of input in this area. Any last comments coming up or any other verbal input? Okay, well, let's move to energy efficiency. I'll pass it to Edith.
Thanks, Ben. So you all know the drill now. I just want to, before I jump into energy efficiency, I just want to make a note. There are a lot of really great questions in the chat. Some of them are, this is a really complicated process, and we want to take the time to be thoughtful about our answers. We also don't have our chief modeler here, Jeremy Hargreaves. So please keep posting your questions there. We're trying to stay in listening mode, because if we start answering questions, the conversation shifts more to us speaking, and that's not what we want to be doing in this forum. But we do want to get back to you. So we're going to provide written answers to your questions. We're going to post them on the website. We encourage you to sign up for our email list, because that's where you'll get regular updates on kind of what to find on the website. But I just wanted to make that really clear, that it's not that we don't want to answer your questions. It's that we're trying to keep the focus on the conversation and keep ourselves a little quieter, and also to have the full team to help answer questions. So, okay, energy efficiency. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to tee up the topic a little bit. So we're talking about energy efficiency and distributed energy resources. So they're two things, but they're all happening in your home or business. It's stuff that's kind of on your side of the electric meter. And so we're interested in hearing your questions around these topics. Next slide, please. So I have a slide for energy efficiency. This shows how much energy we've saved since the early 1980s, or the late 70s, in fact. And you see a big rise in savings over time. And this is thanks to energy efficiency being recognized as a priority resource for our region and our state. So that big number up top is the amount of average megawatts saved. And this resource is only second to hydro in terms of what it's providing to our region. So if we hadn't saved this, we would have to build a whole bunch of additional power generation. The pie chart shows you where these savings come from. So we have utility programs that some of you all, or many of you probably are familiar with. Many of these programs support activities that are implemented by the Energy Trust of Oregon, or you can see here also we have NEA, which is the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, who also does a lot of work in this area. We have federal standards that have given us things like more efficient appliances. And we have state codes that include rules that make buildings more efficient, with things like more insulation and better windows, and just make that standard practice. So when you buy a new home, it's probably in better shape than when you buy an old home, not just because of age, but because the standards have been updated over time. Distributed resources, I think a lot of people think of solar PV. That's a really big one. There are other small scale resources out there. And I don't have a slide, but I'll just try to illustrate another area that I think is interesting and has already kind of crept up in some of the comments, which is kind of broader distributed energy resources that might be things in your home that aren't generating electricity like a PV panel does, but can play a really important role. So for example, we all have a big thermos, or most of us do, in our basements, and it's an electric hot water heater, and you can heat the water heater at night. And if it's electric, that leaves a lot of, that would be charging, heating up at night using cheap hydro when not many people are using electricity. So it's not expensive at that time. And then you can use that hot water heater from the thermos during the day. And that saves electricity for other daytime uses, like powering the computer you're on now. We talked about EVs and batteries. I saw that there was a comment on vehicle to grid. it's not, so that's one opportunity. Another is just charging off peak. So not adding to that kind of hottest day of the year, coldest day of the year, that load where we need a lot of electricity. So that's just a quick tee up to kind of the spectrum that we're talking about. It's everything kind of where you are in your home, in your business. It can be PV panels, it can be your EV, it can be a battery. And we're really interested in hearing what you think. So I think with that, let's jump to the questions.
All right, thanks, Edith. So this will be like Groundhog Day, same question. So we'll pull back up the poll, give you a couple seconds to re-enter, and then move into energy efficiency and demand side questions. So biggest questions or concerns for the energy efficiency sector in Oregon? And then you can again use the Menti chat, raise your hand if you'd like to offer verbal comment.
And just to clarify, I realize now when I'm looking at how the question is framed. So we're talking about both energy efficiency and those demand side resources. So please consider this to cover that full kind of range of topics.
Thank you, Lila.
So I might just throw in some, oh, here we go. All right, I'm going to shut up and let the questions roll in.
It's anxiety inducing waiting for that first response to come in when the floodgates open. So how to ensure we capture the full value of energy efficiency to the grid and to customers, considering all the energy sources for this topic, not get stuck on the electric sector. Biggest opportunities to improve Oregon energy efficiency, technologically, geographically, et cetera. Energy efficiency, the default behavior, working through policies, encouraging electric versus direct, so using heat pumps, for example, instead of gas, focused on least cost solutions and recognizing one size does not fit all. Small COUs don't have the same potential as larger utilities. Using time of use charging and vehicle to grid to minimize the winter peak load, decreased startup current for heat pumps. Not only does it require oversizing for the demand, but makes it difficult to integrate with home solar. Utilities benefit under our current system by building new resources. How do we give them incentives to reduce energy? How much of the gap can be covered simply by improving efficiency, avoiding energy waste, and being more efficient with what we already have? Additional supportive programs might be needed for everyone to be able to implement and benefit from energy efficiency and demand side resources, access to energy efficiency technology, removing barriers. Another 30 seconds or so. Thank you for all the input that's coming in. A real-time web app giving current electric use and storage. What changes may be needed to utility programs and regulations to allow for fuel switching? The cost of transition from cheap gas to more energy efficient alternatives? Let's move to the next question around what you're most enthusiastic about as it relates to energy efficiency and distributed energy resources.
I feel like we could put on the Jeopardy theme song and everybody would feel like we're all in the same zone here.
We can add that for the next. Little music playing in the background. Then you hear the ding, dee, 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 and it's like, ran out of time. So energy efficiency improvements in homes can reduce energy burden, improve health. Easiest and cheapest. Consumer choice and ratepayer education, seeing prices come down to make strategies more realistic. Distributed resources becoming a two-way street to support reliability. Provider pays roughly 1-to-1 for my generated solar power, allows me to bank my watts. It's a great incentive. Opportunities to improve resiliency. Not having 500 HVAC units blowing hot air into the outdoors on a 100-degree day. Complete removal of the need for natural gas in homes. Fuel heat pumps and induction stoves. A smart grid that shaves peak loads and local smart appliances. To help schedule the use of power. Applying 160 kilowatts in my EVs to reduce electric bills and increase resilience. Making conservation about energy efficiency more public and widespread, and emphasizing benefits. Another minute or so for written responses on this question around enthusiasm. Reducing pressure on the ecosystems. All homes and businesses accessing weatherization and other efficiency measures and prioritizing environmental justice communities. Reducing pressure, I said that, cleaning up the air, yeah. Bringing down the price curves. For example, learning lessons from light bulbs, recognizing we're successful in working local organizations to serve customers that are traditionally left behind. Local focus. Just another 30 seconds for any last thoughts on energy enthusiasm. Okay, let's move to the last question around the model. What would you like the model to tell us regarding energy efficiency? What are you most interested in learning? And again, Edith, this, maybe a couple examples of things you've heard could be helpful for folks.
Yeah, I think we've heard the kinds of things like, could we look at what happens if we do more or less energy efficiency? What happens if we have more or less focus on distributed resources? We've heard quite a bit about co-benefits too, and even in the previous responses, things like air quality improvements. So I think that this is an intersection of a lot of different things. Maybe that's helpful to folks to just.
Yeah, thank you. So how to assign value to non-energy benefits. If the model shows less efficiency, why that is. In our future, the model shouldn't show less, but more or even more. How much can virtual power plants, distributed storage practically cut the winter peak loads? Efficiency is job one. Solar storage used in residences and parking lots for DC fast charge decarbonizes, lowers load, and makes battery power available for emergency services. If we go all in on energy efficiency, how much will that make it possible to meet clean energy goals and relieve need for new transmission? How improving efficiency of current technologies relates to adoption of those technologies, what level of subsidies are necessary for additional adoption of electric systems over existing gas ones. Scroll down, what are the benefits from each source? What happens if we do not incentivize energy efficiencies? Priority items, for example, induction range versus heat pump, water heater versus heat pumps to determine government subsidies, need on the ground to test assumptions. Disagree that more will necessarily be the case. Cost-effective, low-hanging fruit achieved. How do we assure energy efficiency appliances and conservation can reach all Oregonians equitably? What new state or federal policies might be needed to scale up energy efficiency and participation in demand response strategies? Thank you for adding responses. Understanding, considering trade-offs, how much subsidy is needed to achieve the results in the end deliverable. Another minute or so on this last question. Not seeing any other responses come in. I would offer, we have a few minutes before we move into closing. So I think if we probably take down the slides for a minute. I'm going to throw a little curveball to my team, but I'm wondering just, as folks have had the chance now to not just reflect your own inputs, but to see what your other participants have put. I guess I just wanted to open it up for anyone who would offer any reflecting thoughts or any additional things that are coming up for you. And you can throw it in the chat. We don't have a Menti question for this, but just with our additional time, just wanted to offer some space for folks, maybe to come into the conversation, to offer some overall reflection or any thoughts that are coming up for you. So just wanted to create a little space for folks in the audience. If you'd like to raise your hand and come into the queue, love to give you an opportunity just to offer some parting thoughts. Or you can add any additional kind of overall thinking into the chat if that's helpful. I tried. Yeah, Toby and Brennan. So let's go Toby and then we'll go to Brennan. Thank you both. You can see your facilitator struggling to get people to talk out loud. Toby, you're a savior.
Thank you very much. And to all of you, thank you. This is really important. I know it's all in your heart. Sorry for the longer comment earlier in the fast talk. I'm just trying to cover a lot of ground. The one point I'd make is that our big picture is the picture. And so, a wise old man once told me that to achieve anything, you need to know two things: what your ultimate goal is and what you're going to do next. And so I think we could apply that in Oregon, that we have lots of solar storage, that we could actually lead in the economic miracle of transitioning from carbon fuels to non-carbon fuels. And we do that one system at a time, one building, one fleet. And so I would love to see an Oregon plan that actually addressed Oregon buildings, the public buildings, the schools, the administrative buildings, because at the end of the day, all we're talking about is electricity and fuel. And the question is really, what's the best way to do that? And we want to do it in Oregon. And with your leadership and all of the mechanisms and all the levers and funding you have, you know, the talk of clean hydrogen, it's not aspirational, but we have to get started. That'll take effect. It'll take 5 years to go from where we are to the first hydrogen stations, clean hydrogen stations in truck stops and things. But in the meantime, let's solar and storage for all buildings that are government and parking lots, and we can make it a tremendous inroad into all the other things we wish to achieve. So in closing, just thank you very much for that work. You know, best way to solve a problem, don't make a problem. So the faster we get out of the carbon atom and into the 21st century, the better for everyone. And we might as well really make Oregon a flagship for how you really get it done. And just if we could keep our scope to 2030, where we have some chance of making an effect and having accountability for that effort, that would be the greatest thing and humblest thing we could do is try and focus, because you have great objectives, clean energy, electricity, you know, HB 2021. But to actually do it and actually get there, we owe the young people our coordinated effort to simplify and get the job done. And that will be the best for everyone. And that's what you're doing. Thank you. And I'll leave it there and say thanks for everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate your comments, Toby. Thank you. Brennan, let's bring you up.
All right, how's that?
That's great.
Okay, first I want to say thank you. You guys are doing a great job. And so I'll preface this, I may have missed part of this, but I just wanted to add in one of the things I'd love to see in the model or the report strategy when it comes out is at least a couple of key metrics of technology advancement, of basically a model based on where we're at right now and basically nothing changing versus if a few key technologies advance on a reasonable scale. So i.e. battery storage goes from $400 a kilowatt hour to 300 to 100 to 50. And what, if that makes a transfer, at what point makes a transformational change in the change of our plans. And a second one, if hydrogen storage goes from $1,500, $1,000 a kilogram down to 50 or 100 somehow, what changes that make, and help that inform what the maybe most critical breakpoint is in value returned for additional research and or efforts on the state to advance those technologies, both in a conceptual sense of building them out and then additionally here in the state specifically of being able to bring some of those key technologies here. I know that I'm part of the PowerRise consortium that's working to kind of do the DOE proposal for Clean Tech Hub in Portland. And we're really working on trying to pull in additional information on justifying why these specific technologies are useful and worth the federal government putting in a couple $2 billion into the Northwest of Technology Hub. So bringing that in and mixing that with the state goals would be, I think, a powerful message.
That's great. Thank you, Brennan, for that. Let's bring Eric in, and then I think we'll start transitioning to our close. But I appreciate these final thoughts. Eric, jump in.
To Brendan's comments, the classic approach of a stock analyst is to look at the production learning rate of products, which is the cost reduction for every cumulative doubling of global output, which has been very useful for extrapolating 5 to 10 years into the future for batteries, LEDs, solar, wind, for cases where you're not like limited to some physical size like a wind turbine, or there's just not enough raw materials. But certainly a basis for the costs of technologies would be something like Bloomberg uses for where they publish, here's what we expect for EV costs, battery costs, solar costs storage costs. And that's a really useful baseline. Everybody should be aware that those already exist, whereas some of the nascent technologies like hydrogen, it's really too early to tell much about the cost trajectory, but we can start to triangulate it as the R&D progresses. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric.
Good job.
Right, thank you. Well, I appreciate those final thoughts from participants. Just, you know, their extra time. Just wanted to make sure if there was folks that wanted to offer any additional input. So let's move to our closing. Edith, I think I'm passing it to you to help wind us down here.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And thank you, everybody. Really appreciate the participation today. Stay on until we're done. If you can, I'm going to give you some helpful information. Everybody seems really interested and engaged, and I want to give you a quick view of additional opportunities to learn and to share your thoughts. So first of all, as I mentioned before, we will be preparing written comments to the questions that received today. We also had a webinar yesterday that presented the technical approach to the strategy, the kind of how that modeling is going to be undertaken. And I encourage folks to go to our website and watch the recording of that if you're interested in learning more. You can also complete our form, our survey following this webinar that has a lot of the same questions that we asked, but we realized you might want to have more time to reflect and to provide answers that are longer than 200 characters. So encouraging you to fill that out. We also have a comment portal that will be open until August 31st. That's closing after August 31st for the kind of inputs into the technical piece of the work. And we'll be talking policy early next year and be soliciting a whole bunch of feedback then too. But we have that written public comment portal. You have the link here. And I also just want to add that, and I think this might be on the next slide or the one after. If we can go to the next slide. We have two kind of engagement structures that will be meeting between now and September. So we have an advisory group. That's a group of 29 people representing different professional and life experiences. We're checking in with them about monthly. So we have a meeting on August 14th, on September 9th. The links to these meetings will be available online, and these meetings are open for anybody to listen in. We also have a bunch of working group meetings coming up. And I think the next slide will show the schedule, so I'll just flash it up on the screen. And here's a link again to where you can find all the meeting agendas. So you can see here, we have a whole bunch of working groups. I saw interest in different parts of this kind of different areas in the conversation today. So if you're interested, you know, pick your topic, see if you can make it to listen into that meeting. If you can't, you can always listen to a recording. And if you have something you want to share, but you're not in a working group, we will take those comments and we'll be working through them. I just think it's important to add too that the way that the modeling is going to be structured, and Ruby spoke to this a bit, is we're going to have kind of 5 scenarios that look at different options to meet, well, actually 6. So we'll have kind of a central scenario, and then we'll have 5 alternatives to that to show us how we can meet our energy policy objectives. And a lot of the types of questions that we heard today are the types of questions that we could put into a scenario to say, all right, we think this might happen, but what if that happened instead? And the difference between this and that is really interesting because it tells us what happens to cost, what happens to what's built in Oregon, what's built outside of Oregon. And so I think that the things that we heard today will inform our thinking on that, as will the conversations in the working groups. And we'll be reporting back out on where we landed kind of towards the end as we get into September, both in that September advisory group meeting, and we'll have a webinar too that we're planning in the next couple of months. So one final note, we have another listening session this evening. We realize people have different schedules. The listening session is from 5 to 7 p.m. if you know anybody who might be interested but couldn't join during work hours, please point them to that listening session. The link is up on the website. You don't have to pre-register, just people can just jump in. So I think that's it. Really appreciate everybody's time. Thanks so much. And it was really interesting. Ben, I'll hand it back to you.
Good, thanks, Ida. So we have, why don't we pull up, Gilly, I think we have a thank you slide. So there are some resources around the energy strategy and an email with a QR code, but just as importantly, if you can go back up, I just want to flash up the survey. So you can add additional input, as Ida said, you know, the 200 character limit doesn't always work for all that you might have wanted to say. So you can use the Survey Monkey link that's on the slide or the QR code listening session comment form for additional input. And with that, we'll leave the slide up as we say goodbye. It's 12 o'clock. Appreciate everybody being here. Great conversation. Much love. Take care. Have a great day.